Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another League Starter video guide for 3.19 Lake of Kalandra. This is a poison enemy weapon, however, with Chains of Command. The one chaos unique nobody cares about, but probably everybody will want this time around. I haven't decided which my League Starter will be, if it's going to be a regular poison enemy weapon or if it's going to be this one. I'll probably make a video about it, but it's very much leaning towards this one. As usual with the other guides I have, this build has a low budget set and it is recommending to level with Absolution till you get the Chains of Command as well as a decently leveled Animate Guardian, which is why I don't have the leveling skills set in this. And the tree set for it, it's literally the same approach as we have done with the Absolution trees in the past. And that's basically it. This is an occultist. And every time you make any changes on this, it's going to be a bit tricky to display the amount of DPS this build is doing. So I'm going to show you how to do that right away. If you go to skills and then you click on the animate weapon, that if you hover over, you see the level 20 because we're going to use a Gravebind on our animate guardian. So because of that, we're going to make sure that we're using the level 20 version. So you click on include the full DPS and have a 14. By doing this DPS will show up. Anytime you make any changes, if I do this and I change back to this, you can see here that it's fine. It's actually still there. But if I change my Guardian to look at the gear he's using and then change back, now the DPS is gone. So to get that back, all you do is left click, including full DPS, and bring it up to 14, and you'll see your full capable DPS output, which in low budget is 3.9 million. Pretty juicy, I'd say. Ascendancy nodes, we're going to be rushing through Void Beacon and with Withering Presence. Then we pick up Profane Bloom and Malediction. Profane Bloom is only going to be really enabled once you have a Witchfire Brew Flask. This allows you to have this one running through packs of enemies as they explode with the Occultist clearing. Really smooth. Malediction is there to allow you to have the Witchfire Brew on a boss together with a Mark Curse. The way this build works is very straightforward. We're going to use 1 or 2 Writhing Jar Flask. I tend to prefer to run only 1 if I can sustain it. If that's a problem, then I switch in 2. For single target boss fights, I tend to sometimes ignore the Witchfire Brew, or I'll remove the Granite Flask, or in this case, I would probably just remove the Quicksilver versus bosses like Cirrus and whatnot. But it's a matter of personal preference to enable 2 Writhing Jar Flasks to spam out more worms so you can summon minions. The way it works is that you spawn out some worms with your flask. You or your other minions or your Animate Guardian will kill them, but because the Animate Guardian is wearing a set of Gravebind gloves, every kill that is nearby him will count as his kill, which will then, thanks to Chains of Command, trigger the level 20 Animate Weapon, which you can have up to 14 weapons of. The Animate Weapon will actually be animated weapons that is using the weapon the Animate Guardian is wearing. So in this case, we'll be in the low budget use a Wasp Nest. The reason we're doing this is because it gives the best approach of damage output for poisoning, and also allowing the Animate Guardian to wear a shield, which we'll use a Victorious Charity for. The reason for this is to make sure that he survives better on the low budget version. This is something we're going to switch into a 200 weapon later once we have better gear to keep him alive through other means. Outside of that, when it comes to the tree, it's very straightforward. We'll be making sure that we scale up some minion defensive layers by speccing out to offensive nodes, HP nodes, and in here we get the defensive nodes as well as minion have plus to all maximum resistances, which makes it very important that we make sure that minions get some extra res, which we get through Purity of Elements, which will cover this entirely for our minions. And then obviously we get the life masteries, increased effective offerings, and then just get the divine shield to regen some of our energy shield, which is very helpful in general for extra layers of defense, because our gear is going to have some energy shield pieces on it, reaching between 500 and 1000 energy shield. We'll also be making sure we have determination reservations as well as vitality reservation, because we're pumping up 440 life per second. Pretty juicy. So it's very straightforward. Again, as with all minions, poison builds or chaos oriented builds will be specking corruption and the chaos mastery for wither to make sure that we apply the wither, which is why we're not going to be using withering touch. So item wise, the wand on the low budget or any weapon that gives plus level of spell, minion, even physical skills to some degree, but spells and minions are the ones you want to go for with a trigger craft. Lioness Remorse, very generic, increased maximum life with high amounts of armor, as well as an increased chance of block. It does reduce your movement speed, though. You can use a rare one as well, but this one is a very solid and should be a cheap option for you to run with. Helmet, not enchanted, bone helmet with some extra life. You can obviously get the plus level of all minion skill gems on this, but that's going to cost you a bit more currency. And those levels doesn't actually increase your damage output. It actually only focuses on keeping your Animate Guardian sturdier than ever. Chains of Command doesn't need to be 6 linked, just needs to be 6 socketed. And then you have a pair of generic gloves with life, pair of boots with life and movement speed, oiling, replenishing remedies, which I'll get to in a bit, life, and most likely we're going to smack a lot of our dexterity on this slot. Rings, just life and rest. Keep in mind that we can drop bone rings to give you minion related modifiers to those as well, if you can, without sacrificing your life or resistances or attributes. Darkness of the Throne is a very cheap approach where we're smacking in generic jewels with 1 life and 1 damage modifier. You can have flat added physical damage as well, that works fine. Flat added chaos damage works fine. And obviously in damage when you use a minion skill recently, it works fine as well. Witchfire Brew is the one item that enables the Profane Bloom ascendancy. If it's too expensive or you want to prioritize your currency elsewhere, wait with that till later and just do Profane Bloom as the last lab. Rising Jar is build enabling just as much as Chains of Command. You'd prefer to run 2 till you get comfortable with the build, and then you can try to see how it feels to only run 1. If you can feel comfortable with that, remove it and then add a defensive flask instead so you can keep the defensive numbers high. The jewels, we're going to use a Mana Moose Gaze for scaling multiform minions and more GHAZZY jewels. So when it comes to the replenishing remedies, and the reason we're using a survival secret jewel is to make sure that we actually get passive generation of flash charges. We're also going to be using the, I think it's Rislatha Pantheon that allows us to get flash charges as well. The reason we're doing this, in combination with these flask nodes that increases flash charges gain, and the mastery that gives us life and mana flask gaining a charge, and the Rising Jar is a hybrid flask, means that you get 2 charges every 3 seconds, as well as the replenishing remedies giving another 4 charges every 3 seconds, and increased flash charges gained, is to basically self-sustain versus any kind of content like Isirus, Elder, Uber Elder, Shaper, and all of these kind of bosses, Eater World, Searing Exarch, etc., etc., to still be able to spam our flask to summon minions, because this is how we summon our minions. By spamming this flask, they get killed, they count as the Animate Guardian's kills, and therefore you get your weapon. So this is how you enable this build, which is why we don't have any any leveling sections when it comes to the gearing here. But this will all tell you to run Absolution, because that will be one of the best ways to approach it. So that pretty much covers the how the build works, how to function it, the gear, the tree, and the ascendancy nodes. The skill-wise, like I mentioned, we don't need a 6-link. We only need to run a 6-socket. So we're going to run minion damage, chance to poison, unbound ailments, added chaos, multi-strike, and predator. And we can switch the predator for feeding frenzy or minion speed. It's a matter of personal preference, which gem you want to switch for when it comes to clearing. The trigger setup in your weapon will be a Desecrate with a level 1 and a level 1 life tap, as well as your flesh offering to increase your damage output. This is to reduce cost of mana, because that's going to be very tight, so instead we put this on our life, which we have a ton of regen for. Wither Totem is the standard setup with a Wither Spell Totem multi-totems. And then we have a Aura setup with Purity of Elements for our defenses and Elemental Ailment immunities. And then we have Determination, Defiance Banner, and Mobility through a Flame Dash. And the Animate Guardian is supposed to be linked with Minion Life and Feeding Frenzy. Since we're running Purity of Elements, we don't need to run Elemental Army here. Instead, we're smacking in a lower level Vitality to give us more life regen. Balance this depending on how much mana you have left over, so you don't fuck yourself over. The last setup is basically where we just shove in the remaining sockets. We're going to have a Molten Shell, Convocation, Poacher's Mark, and Precision. So before I move on to the higher budget versions, I do want to quickly talk about the Animate Guardian gearing. So we're using Inextricable Fate. You can use any rare. The reason I took this one is because it adds some layers of defense, good amount of movement speed and life, and some chaos rest. It's a little bit whatever. Grapevine, mandatory. Belly of the Beast could be Ambush, Charge, Crusader, Chainmail. It can be a rare chest. It can be a doppelganger. It can be a Garb or the Ephemeral. There's so many different items you can use. Basically, the TLDR is this: get him armor and HP and he'll be fine. Learcast got significantly buffed in 3.19 Lake of Kalandra, so you and nearby allies gains 50% increased damage. This should be replicated in the configuration here in the custom modifiers, so that's already enabled. And then a Victorious Charity is a good layer of defense with some Chaos Rest, but also gives him the chance of generating Frenzy charges on hit. This is not something I'm including in the POB because it will happen very rarely, but it's a nice little addition. So the reason we're using a Wasp Nest is because it's a very fast-hitting weapon with a decent PDPS. It costs almost nothing, and it also increases damage against poisoned enemies, which will, with 5 poison, which will happen very quickly with this build, and also gives us chance to poison. Now, what's really important here is similar to the Soros build, is that we've added 40% chance to poison through minion jewels. This is from the Ghastly Jewels approach, which you can see here, which we're running 4 of. We don't know the numerical value of the chance to poison on these jewels yet, but it is a fundamental damage increaser for this build. Make sure you have chance to poison on every hit. If that means you have to remove the increased damage modifier and just run life with poison mod, do so. You will benefit damage output from doing that. Outside of that, the higher budget version, when you feel comfortable with your enemy guardian survivability, you would switch the wasp nest for a dancing dervish. But at that point, we're going to be talking about the medium budget. So let's move over to that PUB. The medium and high budget PUB looks like this. We're sitting at 12.3 million in the medium budget. As you can see, the tree has changed quite significantly, running double clusters with the triple passives, with Zealot's Oath going into Chaos Inoculation and having a Thread of Hope to reach the Glancing Blows here, as well as the Divine Shield. Now, keep in mind, I'm not going to go too in-depth when it comes to the medium or high budget versions. However, I'll be focusing on the more fundamental parts that people might not know about. Obviously, we'll run the same oiling and the flask to sustain. Again, running a Writhing Jar. You could run 2 if you need to. Profane Bloom is enabled through Witchfire Brew. Instead, we're using United in Dream. Now, you could use United in Dream in the low budget if it's not too expensive. This will increase your DPS insanely. But for the high budget or the medium budget version, we will be using this as a baseline with Aegis Aurora for defense, and we will be sustaining through Energy Shield regen and actually be CI with this build. Again, Chaos Mastery, very important. Make sure you get your block cap. The jewels are basically just Feasting Fields, Renewal, Vicious Bite. And the big part here is the Animate Guardian. So in this PUB, you have in the bottom left the availability between high budget and medium budget. High budget basically just changes some minor stuff, such as really big clusters compared to the medium budget. In the item section, in the skill section, you have some alt quality gems, but in the high budget, you're suddenly now running with woke gems. So let's just focus on the medium budgets. So in the high budget here, in the gear section, there's 2 things that's happening. First off, medium budget endgame gear needs to use the medium budget Animate Guardian in the DPS display. In the high budget endgame, you need to change this into the high budget Animate Guardian to get a fair display of how much DPS your build will actually do in the high budget section, which is now 31.6 million. However, we're going to switch everything back to medium budget, which means I switched them all back to the medium budget endgame, and I also changed the AG gear to medium budget Animate Guardian, and that'll see 12.3 again. So the big thing when it comes to the Animate Guardian in medium budget is actually a Dancing Dervish. So a quick few notes about this without trying to make this video too long. They will not use the Manifest skill. The reason we are using this sword is because it is hilariously fast attacking with 450p DPS. It is stupidly good, but it will not trigger the Manifest. They will also not be given Rampage because minions cannot get Rampage. You can, not the minions. So those things do not exist and does not affect the build at all. It's just that the weapons will look like the Dancing Dervishes and run around. And it's a really good weapon for this build. Higher budget version will obviously use Crown of the Tyrant, Doppelganger, Greybind, and kept the Inextricable Fate. And in the high budget Animate Guardian, we are using the same gear, except the weapon is now a crafted 700 plus PDPS Reaver Sword with Poison modifier, with preferably the Deafening Seal Essence, and a bench crafted flat 100% physical. These are very, very, very expensive, which is why it's in the high budget gear. Another quick note before I end this video is that if you play this build, be very careful before you start playing it, because the Animate Guardian, if he dies, you will lose all the gear he had equipped, and you have to re-gear him before the build can be started to be played again, which is why a lot of people might not want to play this. I consider this build one of the best builds I've ever played in this game, and it's very likely going to be my favorite build for 3.19 because I love Poison Animate Weapon, and I just feel it's more comfortable playing it with Chains of Command. Yes, I feel like the Occultist is better. I just didn't like the Occultist approach with the regular Animate Weapon, which is why I kept it as a Necro. Do keep in mind that the high budget version does change the Withering Presence because we don't need the Chaos Rest, so we do take Vile Bastion for Energy Shield Regen and Stun Immunity, so do keep that in mind, which allows us to run the Soul of Lunaris Pantheon instead. Anyways, I don't want to prolong this video too much. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you watched this far, I appreciate it. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Till then, stay safe. Keep rocking.